What? There's a season 2? Let's watch it. I'm trying not to, make this right all about me right off the bat, but a big reason, and the reason that this scene resonated so much, like right from the jump of season 2, is for those that don't know, my parents have had a lot of health issues over the past, I'll call it like 8 months to a year, and so I lost my mom in June to cancer. There was a lot of time in hospital with her. My dad has been in and out of the hospital, both with COVID and then some of the neurodegenerative stuff and the heart issues that he deals with. And so on one hand, I feel this deeply, but then on the other hand, I think about like when I was working in restaurants 10, 12, 14 hours a day, my parents' health was like relatively stable for all intents and purposes. And so having to balance both a restaurant job as well as the emotional toll of seeing your parents go through this, but then simultaneously needing to be the caretaker in this situation, it's all a lot. And I can just only imagine what, Marcus is feeling at this moment during this point in the show. Because you have this additional level of like anxiety that is just like on your shoulders throughout the day, right? Am I going to get that phone call that, so my loved one is no longer here or something happened that is catastrophic? It's a lot. And so I get it. I grew up in the Midwest too. Grew up in Wisconsin. Know the ice scraping game well. Right in the morning when it's the last thing you want to be doing. Let's spend Marcus's commute talking about two things. One, my name is Justin Khanna. Thanks so much for joining me on this breakdown of season 2 of The Bear. I spent almost 10 years in Michelin and fine dining environments. I've done pop-ups and ran event production companies of my own. I also did an entire breakdown of season 1, if you want to go ahead and check that out. And secondly, if you didn't catch the little scrubbing timelines in my thumbnails of The Bear Season 2 in that cold open, I have watched Season 2 all the way through. And so this is going to be me going back, watching it again, giving my insights into what you might have missed, things that are they true or are they not, and just all the other fun details that they managed to include in this award-winning TV show. It's the end of an era. We're back. Part 2. All right, we will do a quick cookbook shelf pause because there's just a couple that stood out. I think, enough people, I've linked them down low in the description, people who have like really taken a microscope and a magnifying glass to the cookbook shelves that Carmen keeps. But there's just a couple spines of books that kind of stood out to me. I think that's kind of an interesting place that we've arrived at with cookbooks where the, like very monotone, minimalist, like fight-on book with just the name of the restaurant or the name of the book in all big black letters is like, yeah, that's maybe easy to read. But there's some that just have a little bit more character. Like these two Magnus Nielsen books definitely stand out. One because it's the red and the blue, and then one because it's this like very Nordic landscape. This one too, The Elements of Taste. This is like a very actually hard to get your hands on book. I carted this book around for many years and I unfortunately got rid of my copy. And then you've got some of your other heavy hitters like Jerusalem, super popular one, Tartine Bread, Relay. If you want to check out the interview I did with Chef Kristen Puglisi on my podcast, you can go ahead and check that one out. I see the Flavor Thesaurus here. These ones that have very like definitive spines. I love that. And just some insight for the maybe not chef watching. The reason that chefs keep cookbooks in either their offices or near where they come up with ideas, sometimes near their computer or where their notepads are, is just to kind of help with creative block sometimes. I think some people definitely are culpable for just copying dishes straight out of cookbooks, but it's oftentimes when like I have a product that I need to use, or a purveyor is telling me that they're getting this, or I'm just really stuck and I'm having like writer's block almost. It can be really helpful to like pull a cookbook down from the shelf and just thumb through it and be like, oh, this flavor combination, it might not even be the one that you use, but it's just being able to see different examples of other dishes that other people are making can sometimes help you overcome that and actually decide, oh, cool, this is going to be the appetizer that I'm going to go with. I think there's maybe also this funny element of like who you surround yourself with that kind of influences what cookbooks you decide to put on your shelf, or if you curate almost like your Mount Rushmore or your like board of advisors of chefs that you could just kind of like, as you come into your office, you're like, oh, Michel Bras in here, or, like Greg Kunz is in here. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I always got value early on in my career with like trying to seek out excellence and trying to actually put that on a little bit of a pedestal and try to aspire towards that and learn as much as possible. This list that we're looking at here shows us, in my opinion, two things that just kind of goes understated with restaurants. One is the costs that just kind of go unnoticed, the behind the scenes operational expenses that are needed with like gas lines and building permits and food handlers cards and like all these online things with like the work you need to do to run website ads pads and plate and glassware. And these things need to be managed. They cannot just get swept under the rug or forgotten about because they manifest in other ways when that happens. So it's like the admin burden as well as the financial burden of staying on top of these things. And for chefs, this can like blindside you, right? Because you might say, I have no experience getting a liquor license. I know nothing about plumbing, but I'm needing to have to do it. And then oftentimes on the guest side, they can think like, oh, well, this restaurant is only responsible for food. Food is their product. Not understanding that like in order to have the door open and be able to say that, yes, we can serve you food, there's so much behind the scenes stuff that has to go into even making that possible. So I'm glad that they highlight that in the show. Are these trays all the same? No, they're not all the same size trays. Okay, these moments kind of make me upset because did this tray fall have to happen? I don't know. It's the same thing with the veal stock falling from the top shelf. And it's like, did Sydney learn her lesson on that thing of the like taking on more than you can actually physically accomplish? Maybe, maybe not. There's also part of me that thinks this was dramatized for television, but how many times has Sydney gone through that door in her time in this restaurant? Like, does she not know the force that she needs to apply to get through the door? Was she thinking that someone was maybe coming around the other side? Do missteps like this happen? Absolutely. But usually it's like instantiated by something else, like somebody bumped into you or somebody put something behind the door. And so you thought that you had enough force to go through the door, but it was like you got stuck somewhere and then that kind of put you off balance and then the trays fell. You guys let me know in the comments if this is like realistic or not with her dropping all of this.
Okay.
So AC,
yes.
HVAC.
So we are at 85. No, just kidding. 95.
It's true. The numbers of commercial restaurant equipment and staffing and permitting and construction are gargantuan. I can bring a couple moments to mind when I've either had to do walkthroughs of spaces for businesses of my own, or I've been a part of like opening teams where you're sitting in these meetings and you're hearing about the numbers associated. And yes, it is absolutely helpful to model these out because I'm not a fan of the like ostrich bury your head in the sand. It's like, oh, well, we'll figure it out in the future type of mentality with this stuff, because that's where people get burned, where at the end of the day, I've been in situations in restaurants where like you're the staff member and you're like the last one that's on the list of people to get paid because there's this $10,000 thing that we needed to pay for and this $40,000 thing that needed to get paid for first. And then ultimately, like at the end of the day, you as the team member, as the line cook, don't get your paycheck, or like your paycheck gets withheld from you for a certain amount of time. And that's not a good feeling. As with most things in like finance and in life, like planning to be a little bit more conservative with how you plan out these numbers, that's where I err on the side of, because best case scenario, you have a little bit left over, you came in under budget, and then that's actually a really good feeling because then you might be able to reinvest those things or actually like, oh, claim a profit, like shocking. And then yeah, worst case scenario, you need to come to the harsh realization that like we need more money from some source, whether that's bringing in an investor or a business line of credit, or we need to save money on other things or say no to other things that we had wanted to do so we can make room for the absolutely essential things to get our doors open and start making revenue. There's that KBL.
I love you, but I do not have time for
All right, quick. And just to see what Richie's thinking about here in episode 1 and how this ultimately pans out for him this season, I think it's really exciting. And so if you want to make sure that you see this entire season, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. I still love that Burf shirt, the original Burf. What I'm about to say is going to maybe come off a little bit I told you so-ish, but you remember in season 1, we have Richie who was like making fun of Carmen for like working at these high-end restaurants and spending time using tweezers and making these dishes that took more time than what the previous iterations of this restaurant required. And this is where you see that flip the other direction, where Richie is feeling like, I don't have the skills, I don't have the experience, I don't know where I'm going and what my purpose is. And Carmen is the opposite. Like, he might not exactly say, he says it in the scene, like, it's not fun for me, but like, I know how to work hard. I know how to make things, you know, elevated and look in a particular way. I know how to organize a kitchen. I know how to cook. And I think that's why you sacrifice in those early days of your career, because you're learning. You're in the season of learning where you're trying to amalgamate all of this information and knowledge and skill development. And without trying to be too motivational, what I'm really seeing in this scene is like, if you're someone like Carmen who has ambition and drive and hunger, I want you to go do those things, because what we saw in season 1 is somebody like a Richie type character who does not share those same goals and ambitions and desires that you have, wanting to drag you down into their comfort zone and ultimately stifling your growth and your learning and the things that you want to ultimately accomplish, because it's more comfortable and cozy and makes them feel less shitty about themselves when they are in that situation. And so just to make sure that this, if this reaches the right person and you're trying to go after it, it's like, I want you to do that, because this is the dynamic. This is how the score ultimately plays out, is that one person ends up with regret and then one one person ends up being more skilled and more capable. I hate that I have to do caveats in these types of videos because obviously this does not apply to all situations, but if this, any little bit of this scene happened to resonate with you and my pep talk associated with it, I want you to continue to get after it because it is going to matter. And if nothing else, I support you in going off and doing this thing.
New Jeff?
If Carmen is the executive chef and you're the CDC, you're the new Carmen. We need a new...
Just a quick talk on Brigade Structure. So there is a kind of a hierarchy that exists in kitchens. We talked about this in season 1 when we were talking about chef de partie roles getting distributed to the team members. But chef de cuisine is chef de cuisine. So this is the person who is in charge of all of the culinary kind of operations, the menu structure, making sure all the components for the dishes taste right, maybe even new menu items that are going to be coming onto the menu, the ordering, the food costing, all of those kind of fall under the purview of the chef de cuisine. That's the de facto person that if the executive chef, the person above that person, is not there, all those responsibilities kind of fall on the chef de cuisine. And that is kind of the head honcho that is in charge of everything on the day-to-day for the kitchen. And then underneath the chef de cuisine, you have kind of like another management team. This is kind of middle management almost, where you have like sous chefs. And sometimes there is someone who is the executive sous chef who is ultimately in charge of managing the sous chefs. And depending on the size of the organization, this can get very convoluted and kind of politicky, but ultimately it does, in a lot of situations, help with making sure that individual responsibilities are delegated, that people feel a sense of ownership. A lot of people think that we're in the food business when we talk about restaurants and chefs and fine dining especially, but in a lot of ways, because of the amount of people that are required, we're in the people business as well.
Half of these pots are burnt on one...
It's such a slog to clean pots that have this kind of carbonized grease on it, and it almost like fuses to the metal. There's a couple of ways to get around this. One is using a product called Barkeeper's Friend. That tends to be really, really helpful as kind of like a chemical that will help with a little bit of like an abrasive scrubby, whether that is like the plasticky one, or if you use like something more harsh, like a steel wool, you can absolutely like make your pots transform from, you know, being gray, brown and grimy to actually having that, a little bit of that silver polish back. And yeah, there are a couple of ways around this, especially in like the commercial context. One is what we're hearing in this scene, which is to buy higher quality, because then you have like less warping, less scratches, less like nooks and crannies for the grease to ultimately get into and cake in there. And the second piece, I guess this can maybe also be a metaphor for life, is just to always stay on top of it so it never gets so bad that it just becomes out of control. Because I've certainly worked in kitchens where like the sheet trays, the corners and the sides of the sheet trays where the 90-degree angle is on the sheet tray, it is just so caked with like, again, that carbonized grease that is just, it is such a work burden to ultimately remove some of those materials that it is almost cheaper from a labor cost perspective to just buy a new one. And I dislike that that's the case, but it is that diligence where it's like on day one, when you get your new pots or you get your sheet tray and there is that little piece of burnt on chicken stock on the corner of the thing, you just need to do the work to making sure that you're scrubbing that off. And that there's a lot of kitchens I've worked in where every single pot and pan is returned to that sparkling silver state. And that's the reasoning behind that, because those little stains compound over time and they start to get bigger and bigger and bigger until the entire bottom side of that pan is black and it's not silver anymore. And then it's really difficult to come back from that. I'm not saying it's impossible, because I've seen it being done before. There's like entire days dedicated in kitchens to like getting things back into a more pristine and polished state. It creates so much more work down the track, in the same way that like if you put off cleaning your room for a month, all of a sudden it's like you have piles of stuff in your room that require so much more work versus if you were to just spend like 5 or 10 minutes a day tidying things up as you go.
These are just really cheap, shitty restaurant supply bullshit.
True.
Maybe we can Barkeeper's Friend some of them.
She said it, Barkeeper's Friend.
Wow. If you need anything.
Yeah, I know.
That's good that he feels open enough to be able to mention the kind of personal life stuff he has going on with his coworkers, and more importantly, like his manager. I think when you have a small team, it's a little bit easier to do that, but I've certainly worked in organizations where like you don't bring up your personal life trials and tribulations at work, because the expectation is that you show up to work and you do your job and your personal life stays at home. And you know, I guess there's arguments to both, but you know, seeing that this is beneficial for Marcus when he's going through this tough time is nice to see.
Corner.
Nobody got stabbed that time. Good job, team.
Everybody is food certified except for Ibra, who just needs to be renewed, and Richie, who actually has never done it because...
Richie.
So two things. One, the kind of order of operations that you see with restaurant permitting sometimes, where like this person needs to give us a permit so that we can move forward to getting this inspected, which will then give us access to be able to do this. Such a common thing. And a lot of it is bureaucracy and just like slow moving government bodies. And some of it's just safety stuff where you actually don't want a gas line and like commercial cooking equipment going when there isn't a hood or, again, a fire suppression system available, so that if somebody happens to leave something on and a fire starts, you want to be able to make sure that entire city block doesn't burn down. And then the second thing that Sydney brought up in that rant was being food certified. And for those that don't know, each county has something called a food handler's card here in the US. And so it's a kind of test that you have to take online. You have to usually watch a bunch of videos or read a bunch of reading materials in order to make sure that you know, again, what we talked about in season 1, what the temperature danger zone is, how to avoid cross-contamination, all of those safety elements of like, they tell you to like wear a cut-resistant glove when you're cutting certain things. Again, it's one of those tests created by a bureaucratic body that is made to make sure that people know what it is that they're getting themselves into, that you're hiring people who have at least a rudimentary level of training when it comes to handling food. It takes like a day or two to get your food handler's card when you first get it, and then when you need to retake the test to ultimately get renewed for it, it's like sometimes 2 years, sometimes it's 5 years, depending on where you live. And then, yeah, when you get hired, your employer will ask, can we please have a copy of your food handler card on file? Because then when the health department comes to that restaurant, they need to see, like, do you have records that show that all of the people working here have their food handler card or their food certification permit?
The password is Go Fast Boats Mojito, all one word. Yeah, Go Fast Boats and then Mojito, all one word.
Oh my God, the amount of anxiety that you hold when a restaurant has an alarm system is borderline terrifying, because this is what happens. You have a commercial level industrial alarm system where if a door gets tripped or something isn't closed when you leave and you set the alarm, it is this hyper loud alarm, one, for security reasons, but then two, there's like all these other layers of like protocol that get instituted. So like the owner will get called, or like there's might be a phone tree of people that get rung. The police get called, or the security company actually sends people out. And it costs a lot of money when any of those things happen. And so you, as a staff member at a restaurant, at all costs, you're trying to avoid setting off the alarm system. On one hand, it's incredibly good and productive and peace of mind to have a security system. But on the other hand, it can cause a lot of like turbulence on the day-to-day when you have other people, the like staff members, who are responsible for like locking up the place or coming in and opening. And it's like, oh, I forgot what the code was for the keypad or whatever it is. Or I thought that the door was closed, but it was not. And it's like you're walking on eggshells with this alarm system sometimes. At least that's the feeling.
Excellent restaurant. And I know that because we're going to get a star.
Sid,
Carmen.
fuck stars.
Okay, well, you can say that because you already got one.
No, I never got one. I retained it.
That's basically a cousin
It's
of getting
not-
one.
I love this discussion. You'll have to let me know down in the comments what you folks think. But Sydney is basically saying that Carmen ran the kitchen at a place that was Michelin recognized. They had Michelin stars. And he was able to actually keep those stars. And so that she is determining that as Carmen was awarded Michelin stars. And Carmen saying, no, somebody else before me actually took this place from no stars to having stars. And I came in and I was just the person who was able to run the operations in a way where we were able to retain those stars. And there is a difference there in Carmen's mind. And I actually fall more in Carmen's camp here. I'll take an example of like a place that I used to work called the French Laundry. They were chef de cuisines that worked at the French Laundry who ran the kitchens there, the two notable ones being like Corey Lee and Timothy Hollingsworth. And so those guys were able to retain the 3 Michelin stars that organization had year after year after year. But then when they leave and then Corey Lee goes and opens Bennu, he doesn't have Michelin stars when he opens Bennu, right? Or Tim Hollingsworth, when he opens Otium, doesn't have Michelin stars when he opens Otium. They have to earn those stars back because it's a new organization. It's a new restaurant. It doesn't follow with that chef from restaurant to restaurant. I think another interesting point to keep in mind here is the fact that the restaurant that Carmen's talking about had 3 Michelin stars. And so for those that don't know, there is no 4th Michelin star. And so the only option Carmen had was to retain the Michelin stars. And if, notice the downside here, if he were to lose a star, go from 3 to 2, all of that responsibility is on Carmen's shoulders. People would point fingers, people would say it's your fault, but he doesn't have any potential upside because he can't actually gain another Michelin star. And so the benefit that chefs will often try to find is in going into organizations where I can take this place from 1 star to 2 stars, or 2 to 3, or from no stars to having a star. And that's what Sydney's effectively talking about. And that's kind of what Carmen's referencing here. That's maybe why he's a little bit nervous, because it's like when you commit to saying, I want to have a Michelin star, like things change, your behavior changes, the menu that you decide to write starts to change. And yeah, talking about this in the context of business, it's like your investors want to know what your goals are with the business, what you're trying to take this. And we see this in the numbers where chefs get interviewed about what was your business like before you had stars and now that you do have stars. How has your business changed? And so it does make a lot of business sense. And bringing that up in an investor conversation is important on what you're trying to do with your restaurant.
So you get a star. And what?
We're dialed.
It's, oh my God. Like, that's the other side of this, is that yes, for those that didn't catch it, Carmen said, when we get a star, we're trapped. And when Sydney said we get a star, we're dialed. And so that is the double-edged sword of getting a star, is that you ultimately have to maintain this because Carmen knows what that game is. And then Sydney's like, oh, well, all the doors will be open for us. And what's important is being aligned with the people that you're working with and what it is that you want to do. Because again, we see it with chefs who are giving back their Michelin stars because they don't want the ramifications that come with winning those awards.
We don't pay you the money by the end of 18 months. Worst case scenario, you helped out your nephew, he blew it, you're out 800 grand and you can make 2 million, and then we are done. Forever.
I want to take a second and just talk about the math of what Carmen just said here for a second, just because I think hearing what these numbers actually mean might actually either like give you some insight into how I think about numbers in restaurant businesses, but also it might help you to start to make sure that you're not taking this as like, yes, I want to take this type of crazy risk when I go into business for my own concept. And so let's just be like super optimistic and say that this restaurant is going to make 10% profit. And let's also say that we're not going to keep the renovation timeline in check here as part of those 18 months. This is going to be 18 months in business. We're going to make enough money to pay back this 800 grand in what we are taking on as an investment. That means a 10% profit, we need to make $8 million across that 18 months. In order to hit that, that means we need to be making just shy of 450 grand in revenue every single month. Saying we're open 5 days a week, 4 weeks a month, that is a little over 20 grand a day that we need to be making in revenue. Again, this number might change depending on how the restaurant is functioning, but that is 100 covers a day. That is a $222.22 check average for every single person and butt in seat that we can get to serve. And again, that's if you can manage to make a 10% profit and you don't have any unexpected expenses that you need to ask for more money for, or that you don't have a bad month on food costs, or that you don't have extenuating staffing costs that you need to be responsible for. I don't know. I could be totally off base. You folks let me know in the comments, but I see this restaurant being much more in the like $120 to $160 check average, much more than the like $225 check average. You let me know. And I guess you could argue like Carmen's just being super ballsy here and pushing all his chips to the center of the table and saying all in just to kind of call the bluff, but I don't know.
Okay, we're gonna have to find people that want to learn, which is gonna be impossible, but it's even more difficult to teach people how to give a shit.
I mean, shameless plug at this point in the video for a program that I run called Total Station Domination, where I teach all of the principles that you need to set up and organize tasks and communicate in a professional manner. And I like to think that that is the result of my students coming out of my program, is it attracts people who want to give a shit, and then ultimately it teaches people some of the tools to be able to come off in a little bit more of a professional manner and learn better and be better teammates in organizations. So that's linked in the description too, if you want to check that out.
I don't know if you want to be my Jeff or whatever.
The first time I got asked to be a sous chef, it was my first time management position too. It was like a conversation of, it was like me and 2 other people who were like reasonable candidates. And it was like, who would potentially be interested in running an AM prep program? And I kind of put my hand up because I was like, yeah, sure. I'd be interested in kind of like moving up in the brigade. And ultimately, like, it took like 2 months before, while I was doing that work, to ultimately get to the place where my chef was like, okay, during one random menu meeting, he was like, oh yeah, by the way, I'd like to congratulate Justin on like becoming a sous chef. And it was just like weird. And it was like, it's also one of the most common questions I get from you folks of, I just randomly got thrust into being a first-time manager and I wasn't prepared for it. And I didn't think that I was a reasonable candidate for it. But like all of a sudden now I'm a sous chef and I don't have the tools and I don't have the training. I mean, it's so awesome that Sydney is actually talking about like training Tina into this role. But ultimately, I think that it is all too common of a trope that people, just get promoted out of nowhere. Also, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think reflecting back to season 1, wasn't Tina the one who like didn't give a fuck about roles and rejected the brigade structure and didn't really care about what you called me? And now she's just like elated.
Quiet. Don't think I've ever heard it be quiet in here.
Definitely not.
There's absolutely something to when the hoods get turned off and the dishwasher stops running and the chatter between people and the clanging of stuff. And it's just, you're in this environment that you so associate with like noise and chaos. And you just have this reprieve of no noise. It's kind of a weird feeling. It's almost spooky.
What are you gonna?
No idea.
Also pretty common, the like locker room section that's like either in a very weird location or it's incredibly small and kind of lumped in with other things. You'll often see like the locker room is in the same room as dry storage, or in this situation it's kind of like I think the dishwasher is here to the left, and then to the right of that is where the locker room is. And that's just where you'll literally see people like taking their pants off and like putting their chef shirt on and changing their shoes out. And yeah, like the nice that they have a hand washing sink there. Not all locker room environments that I've been in have, you know, sinks or a bathroom associated with them. And practically speaking, this is helpful, right? Because you have the ability to like, if you bring your belongings to work, you have a place to put them. Like, again, this seems so rudimentary for people who work like a normal office job. And you're like, yeah, I have my cubicle that I go into. But like, if there weren't for this space for the staff to put their stuff, this would get like thrown underneath, you know, shelves or put on a metro rack or put underneath a tabletop or something like that. And that's actually what you don't want, because if you bring your heavy coat in the middle of winter in Chicago, it's like that's taking up valuable real estate in the kitchen. And so having it isolated to somewhere else can be helpful. But again, not every single kitchen has a locker room. I'd be curious in the comments if you have stories on this. There is also an article that I read on, because the coverage of season 2 of The Bear has been like way higher, like at least an order of magnitude higher than season 1. Everybody like jumped on this show, and it's super cool, right? I'm not bashing it at all. I think it's awesome that this like niche industry show that like only applied to people like us has now gotten this mainstream attention. And Vanity Fair can write an article about it, or GQ wants to cover Jeremy Allen White now because of the character that he played in here. But anyways, what I was going to say is there have been pieces that have come out that talk about the articles of clothing that Carmy wears in each of these episodes. And if you want to just kind of get a sense of like, one, in season 1, they talked about him having a sense of like collecting denim and having a air for style, which is kind of juxtaposed by the fact that he's always in a white t-shirt. But yeah, there's an article in the description of all of the pieces that Carmy wore in season 2. If you want to go check that out, it's in the description. But like having the money from like FX and Hulu to buy you whatever you want your character to wear on screen is one thing, or having a costume designer is one thing. I think that it's very practical, actually, to like think about having a nice coat as part of like the things that you own as a chef or a line cook. Because think about it, right? Like you are this very utilitarian underneath, but then you have to do this thing like commute into work every day. And also you're like in this environment where like I remember when I was externing at the restaurant Per Se in New York, as you are kind of like coming and leaving work, you're going through Columbus Circle, you're going into the giant shopping center, you're walking past all these designer stores, and it's like you almost kind of want to feel like you fit in that environment, because yes, I'm just going literally to like pick herbs for the day, but like when I leave work, I'm walking past people in suits, and I'm getting on the train in New York with all these people who are like dressed in a, you know, like cosmopolitan way. But at the same time, I'm coming home in my white t-shirt that I wore underneath my chef coat. And so I definitely fell into that camp too, just like buying a nice coat so that you had something nice to wear either on your way to work or kind of like after work. If you want to go to have drinks with somebody, it's like you had something reasonably nice to wear so you aren't just coming home in your, you know, hoodie basically. And for some chefs, they don't gravitate towards coats. It's like they gravitate towards shoes. Like there's tons of sneakerheads in chef culture. I don't know, maybe this is a little bit too fringy. Let me know in the comments. Are you a coat person? Are you a sneakerhead? Do you like bags? In my experience, there's like different style choices that different chefs like to make. And so I'm curious for you folks, what stands out? Such an awkward feeling. I remember at this one restaurant I worked at, the chef was really gung-ho on giving everybody an extra day off throughout the month. And so basically you'd have one work week in the month where instead of working 5 days, you only work 4 days. And then we had enough management where like a sous chef would basically pivot into like a tournant role and work your station for the day. And I remember one of the days when it was a Friday night and I got the day off, basically. So a sous chef was going to work my station. I prepped everything kind of like reasonably the day before so that they wouldn't have total chaos when they got on my station that day. And I just remember being like, what do I do? You know, like I don't know how to spend a Friday night in this city because the only way I know how to spend a Friday night in this city is working. And two, all my friends are at work. You know, like all my coworkers, the people I would reasonably go and hang out with on like a Sunday or a Monday when we normally do our industry hang days or go out to restaurants or, you know, go for a walk or whatever it is, go over to somebody's house and cook. It's like all those friends are working. I don't know if they're explicitly saying it in this scene, but the like receipts from grocery stores element, I think is something that like maybe a lot of people don't know about restaurants where, you know, your purveyor might only be able to get you like 6 pounds of parsnips for that day and you're 3 pounds short. And you happen to need to go somewhere to actually make up that difference. And depending on where the restaurant is located, the closest kind of like high quality grocery store that you can go to, or maybe it's not even high quality, like they just need to have the thing that you need to prep the farce for the pasta that you're making. It often results in trips to grocery stores or trips to kind of like traditional retail locations just to get something that you might have run out of, or somebody screwed up a batch and a tray of something happened to fall and you need more kale. It's like the line cook who messed that up will often go to that grocery store to kind of like grab the thing that they need. They'll be given a company card and it's like, hey, I need you to keep the receipt so that we can kind of like log that information. And again, I think this is in Carmen's apartment, so it's not explicitly saying that that's what these receipts are from, but people might have asked as they saw this, like, why are they showing close-ups of Whole Foods receipts? And that's why. You ever see the meme of the like, this is the Google engineer who makes 650 grand a year's bedroom, and it's just like a mattress and a TV on the ground? This is like our version of that, where it's like you are the executive chef of a restaurant and you just have cookbooks on the floor and a whiteboard of dish ideas and like a box of your old starched monogrammed chef whites and like a Vitamix lid. Just that's it. There's nothing else because I don't really spend time here. Or it's like I keep so much of my quote unquote life at work. And so it doesn't really make sense for me to invest in my apartment. I just think this is a funny visual. This is cool, like doing local farm tours. That's a super common thing where you actually have the interaction with local purveyors to get a connection, like just FaceTime with the people who are going to be delivering your stuff. And sometimes that can result in like that farm growing custom stuff for that restaurant. I think that stuff's really cool. Making a training guide, not everybody ends up getting that. Having the plumbing, 86 staff for the day because the plumbing is going to be happening. So just letting everybody know no one can come in because there's going to be plumbers here. Turning the internet on, dish machine, fuck my life to death because why not? And then I guess the little abbreviations here. So front of house, FOH, is like the servers, the SOM team, the bartenders, anybody who's going to be more guest facing and is kind of like more in the dining room when we're talking about the staff of a restaurant. And then back of house, this is the traditional delineation where you have the front and then the back being the kitchen. So that's like the porters, the dishwashers, the line cooks, the sous chef team. That's all part of back of house. Correct me if I'm wrong, but mise en place is spelled wrong. There should be an E on mise en place. But yeah, having back of house do mise en place for the 3 days leading up to the service day, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting like 3-day-old sliced radishes on the day that you come in for friends and family or for opening day. What it means is we might need to like roast bones and make stock on this day, or like make infused oils and freeze them, or we might need to like put away a bunch of ingredients that we happen to get delivered on this day. And then you're doing a bunch of like anticipatory prep on the first day. The second day, you're kind of like, maybe you're rolling out pasta, or you're like making puff pastry, or like pastry team is making ice cream bases and freezing them. And then the day before, like that's when you're doing some of your more involved garnish work. And then that actually preps you for the day that the guests are maybe going to come. And then the last thing that I'm noticing here is like the theme, the meme, the mantra for season 2, which is every second counts. And that's like a kind of a variation, or I guess this restaurant's version of memes that you'll see in kitchens like I worked at. Like Thomas Keller is kind of like the king of these like mantras where he has like, it's all about finesse, or he has the word finesse literally put on the wall with the dictionary definition of the word finesse. And it's like top of mind for everybody to see. And the other one is sense of urgency. And it's usually like right underneath the clocks in Thomas Keller kitchens. And the reason behind that is so that every single time you look up at the clock to do like a time check on yourself, because not most people wear wristwatches like I do, you have the ability to see that mantra and you're like, oh yeah, I do need to move faster. And again, there's 2 schools of thought here. One is like the ideas that you surround yourself with and that you repeat to yourself are the things that you will often find. And I certainly found that in those early days of my career, like I wanted to be pushed and I wanted high standards and I wanted to be surrounded by excellence because I wasn't excellent. I sucked. And so being around this environment where everybody was pushing and to see what a sense of urgency actually looked like was really, really particularly beneficial to me. And then I got to a point where I was like, oh, this is total Kool-Aid. Like saying sense of urgency is like you're burning people out. And I really pushed back on it for a little while. But I'm like, I've come back around and I've like walked both paths. And I think I see the value in having these kind of like moments and cultural signifiers that lets you know, like, this is how we do things here. And yeah, I guess the last point on this is like seeing this visualized. It's like, one, it gives you such a good look into what is required for this. So you can approach the work that this restaurant opening is going to need with the severity and the granularity and the gravity that it requires. Also, I love the fact that Carmen was not the one to make this. I am such a proponent of chefs asking for help and bringing in partners who kind of like supplement their weaknesses. Chefs doing everything, I think, is a recipe, pardon the pun, for disaster. And ultimately having somebody in your corner who is going to take care of this particular thing. I think we've seen it play out in so many productive ways in the past like 5-10 years in restaurant partnerships with chefs and somebody else, like, or even a trio of people, as we're seeing here with Carmen, Sydney, and Kat. There's just too much to manage when this is the type of project that is going up, and having a project manager, some way organizational system, a way to kind of break it down into more digestible chunks. I find that helps people, especially chefs, do their best work. This went through my head as I watched this episode for the first time, and so I'm going to say it again here. I love that they didn't include any food in this episode. And the fact that it was all about logistics and admin work and operations and staffing and costs and finding an investor and tearing things down and renovations, like there was not a single pot or pan that was placed on the stove. And family stuff with Marcus's stuff, like the amalgamation of other things, that it's not just food that chefs and restaurant people deal with, I think is like, it's so telling in this episode. I don't necessarily know if that was intentional or not, but I certainly noticed it. And it was something where I was like, that's actually awesome. I think it's probably going to be missed by most people, but I think it is more or less an accurate reflection of like maybe the percentage of time that's spent on individual things, especially as you get to the ownership level of owning your own food business. I'm making this ask kind of late in the video, but if you're still with me, if you want to make sure that you get updates on the other 9 episodes of season 2 of The Bear, make sure you subscribe down below. Leave a like on this video, comment with some of the questions that I asked throughout this episode. We're also going to be putting out a bunch of shorts, and so if you want to make sure that you get those in your feed, you want to make sure that you're subscribed. Obviously, this is just one guy's opinion on a show that I particularly loved and enjoyed. If you have thoughts or things that stood out to you, I'd love to know in the comments down below. My name is Justin Khanna. Thanks so much for your attention as always, and I hope you have a good one.